always believed my marriage was solid. Sure, we had our share of ups and downs, but after nearly 8 years together, I never once questioned Lisa's loyalty. That was my biggest mistake. Lisa wasn't just planning to leave me, she was planning to leave me with nothing. It started subtly, about 6 months before she filed for divorce. She suddenly became very interested in our house. We had bought it together 5 years ago, both our names on the title, both of us contributing to the mortgage, though I had put down the majority of the down payment from my inheritance. One evening, as we sat on the couch, she casually suggested refinancing the house under her name alone. I frowned. Why would we do that? Her response was perfectly rehearsed. It'll be easier for us financially. I have a better credit score than you, so we can lower the interest rate. At first, it sounded logical. She did have a slightly better credit score, and a lower interest rate meant lower payments. But something about the way she said it felt off. I hesitated. Wouldn't that mean taking my name off the deed? She waved it off, completely unfazed. Oh, we can add it back later. It's just a technical thing. You trust me, right? That last part. That was what made me pause. Lisa never talked like that. That was the moment I knew something wasn't right. I didn't argue with her. Instead, I played along. Sure, let's look into it. She thought I was going along with her plan. In reality, I was quietly consulting with a lawyer. My lawyer, Ethan, took one look at what she was trying to do and told me, do not sign anything. So I didn't. But Lisa was already 3 steps ahead. One day, she came home, beaming. Good news. I handled the refinance. You don't have to worry about it anymore. I played dumb. Oh, did I need to sign anything? She hesitated, just for a second. Nope, it was all digital. I took care of everything. That was when I knew. She had forged my signature. Worse, the house was now in her name alone. 2 months later, she hit me with divorce papers. She acted sympathetic, even tried to play the victim. I just don't think this is working anymore, she murmured, casting her eyes downward as if she were heartbroken. I pretended to be shocked, hurt, lost. But she was smirking. She thought she had already won. In her mind, she had committed the perfect crime. The house was in her name, the mortgage under her name. The court would see it as hers alone. She had even lined up a real estate agent, ready to sell the house and pocket every penny before I could react. I could almost hear her internal monologue. I did everything right. He won't fight back. He won't even know where to start. What she didn't know. I had already started. Lisa walked into that courtroom like someone who had already won. She wore a pristine white blazer, her hair styled to perfection, confidence radiating from her every step. As she took her seat, she even threw me a pitying smile. In her eyes, I was already defeated. Her lawyer, a sharp-looking man in his 40s, stood up and launched straight into their argument. Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Lisa Carter, is the rightful owner of the marital home. As demonstrated by the mortgage and title records, the house is in her name alone. Mr. Carter has no legal claim to the property. Lisa shifted slightly in her seat, her smirk widening. She thought I was about to crumble. She thought I had no chance. I let them talk. Let them build their case, brick by brick, because the higher they built it, the harder it would fall. When they were done, my lawyer Ethan stood up. He took his time, flipping through some papers with deliberate ease. Then he spoke. Your Honor, my client does not dispute that the house is currently in Mrs. Carter's name. However, we have substantial evidence proving that the transfer of ownership was done fraudulently. Lisa's smirk flickered. Just for a second. The judge, a stern woman in her 50s, adjusted her glasses. Fraudulently. Please elaborate. Ethan nodded and walked to the evidence table. Your Honor, we have obtained a forensic audit of the mortgage transfer. Then he pulled out the smoking gun. A copy of the mortgage transfer document. Signed by both Lisa and me. Except I never signed it. Ethan continued, my client never signed these documents. We have a forensic handwriting expert prepared to testify that his signature was forged. Lisa's entire body stiffened. Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Objection. That's a serious allegation. The judge held up a hand. I'd like to hear more. Ethan nodded, sliding another file across the table. Additionally, Your Honor, we have records showing Mrs. Carter actively pursued this transfer without my client's knowledge, contacting the mortgage lender, submitting forged authorization forms, and even attempting to expedite the process to avoid his detection. I risked a glance at Lisa. Her face had completely drained of color. That smugness, that confidence, gone. She opened her mouth, probably to stammer out an excuse, but her lawyer spoke first. Your Honor, we need time to review this. The judge cut him off. I'm not finished. Then she turned back to Ethan. Continue. Ethan nodded, pulling out yet another file. Your Honor, not only did Mrs. Carter illegally transfer the house into her name, but she also violated the prenuptial agreement in doing so. Lisa whipped her head toward me. She had forgotten about the prenup. Ethan continued, our prenuptial agreement clearly states that any major financial decisions regarding joint assets require both parties' written consent. This fraudulent transfer is not only illegal but also voids any claim Mrs. Carter has to spousal support, as per Section 4 of our agreement. Lisa's lawyer looked like he was about to have a stroke. And Lisa? She looked completely wrecked. Because that meant not only was she losing the house, she was walking away with nothing. But Lisa wasn't going down quietly. She leaned forward, her voice shaky. Lisa sat rigid, her lips pressed into a thin line, her smirk finally gone. But even with the weight of the evidence crushing down on her, she wasn't ready to surrender. Her voice wavered, but there was still defiance in it. This is ridiculous. The house is in my name. The court will still rule in my favor. I finally spoke, my voice calm, deliberate. Actually, Lisa, the court won't have to rule on anything. She turned to me, blinking. What? I let the silence stretch, watching the uncertainty creep into her features. Then I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice just enough to make her lean closer. Because I'm suing you, for mortgage fraud and financial damages. So even if you had one today, you'd be drowning in legal fees for the next 5 years. The courtroom fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. Lisa's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. You're bluffing. Ethan smirked. Actually, we've already filed the lawsuit. You should be getting served any moment now. Right on cue, the doors opened. A court officer strode in, a crisp envelope in his hands. He walked straight to Lisa and placed it in front of her. Her hands trembled as she tore it open, her eyes scanning the page. The color drained from her face. Then came the snapping point. You can't do this to me, she shrieked, slamming the paper down on the table. I deserve that house. The judge's gavel struck like a gunshot. Enough. Lisa recoiled, her body shrinking into her chair. The judge took a slow, deep breath before delivering the final verdict. Given the overwhelming evidence of fraud and contractual violation, the court finds in favor of Mr. Carter. The house will be returned to his name immediately. Furthermore, Mrs. Carter will be responsible for all legal fees and any pending fraud charges. Boom. Game over. Lisa sat there, staring at nothing. Her lawyer, realizing they had lost in spectacular fashion, quietly began gathering his things. I just smiled. But Lisa wasn't done. Even after the ruling, after the lawsuit was thrown into her lap, after her entire scheme had collapsed in real time, she still tried to claw her way out. At first, she just sat there frozen, her hands gripping the lawsuit papers so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her breathing was shallow, like she might pass out. Then, something inside her snapped. You can't do this, she screamed, bolting up from her chair. I put everything into this marriage. You owe me something. The judge's gavel came down with force. Mrs. Carter, sit down or you will be removed from this courtroom. Lisa turned, wild-eyed, toward her lawyer, silently begging for a lifeline. He was already packing up his papers. Even he knew she was done for. But Lisa still wouldn't quit. She spun back toward me, teeth clenched, her voice shaking with rage. You think you're so smart, don't you? I kept my expression neutral. I think I protected myself from a scam artist. Her nostrils flared. You set me up. I tilted my head slightly. Lisa, you forged my signature. That's a felony. You did this to yourself. And then I saw it. The exact moment she realized she was actually, truly screwed. Up until now, Lisa thought this was just a divorce case gone wrong. She figured she'd lose the house, but she'd move on. Maybe get some alimony. Maybe find another target. But mortgage fraud? Forgery? A lawsuit that could bury her in debt for years? She hadn't planned for that. Lisa took a shaky breath, her whole body trembling. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, she changed tactics. Her voice softened, her eyes glistened. Babe, please, she whispered. We don't have to do this. We were good together once. We can figure something out. Right? The sweet talk my way out move. Classic. I almost admired the effort. Almost. I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. Lisa, you spent months planning to screw me over. You don't get to play the loving wife now. Her expression twisted. The facade shattered. You bastard. There she was. The real Lisa. The judge, who had been watching this disaster unfold with visible irritation, sighed. Mrs. Carter, since you refuse to compose yourself, let me be clear. This case is settled. The property is to be immediately transferred back to Mr. Carter's name. And given the evidence of fraud, your financial claims are null and void. Lisa's face contorted in horror. Additionally, the judge continued, her tone turning even graver. Given the severity of this case, I will be forwarding the evidence of signature forgery to the district attorney's office. They will decide whether to pursue criminal charges. Dead silence. Lisa's mouth opened. No words came out. She had lost the house. She had lost the money. She had lost every ounce of control. And now, she might be facing actual criminal charges. Her lawyer stood, clearing his throat. Your Honor, in light of this ruling and my client's behavior, I would like to formally withdraw from this case. Lisa whipped around. What? Mrs. Carter, he sighed, rubbing his temple. I can't represent someone who actively committed fraud. You're on your own. And just like that, he walked out. Lisa stood there, trembling, utterly alone. She turned back to me, her eyes wide, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps like she might start crying. You did this to me. You ruined my life. I stood up slowly, buttoning my jacket with calm precision. No, Lisa. You ruined your own life. I just made sure you didn't ruin mine too. She let out a guttural scream and collapsed into her chair, sobbing. I didn't wait around to see what happened next. I just turned, walked out of the courtroom, and let the doors slam shut behind me. A few weeks later, Lisa tried to fight the fraud charges. She lost. Found guilty. Ordered to pay massive fines that wiped out her savings. Her dream of selling the house for a huge profit. Gone. Her reputation. Destroyed. Even her real estate agent refused to work with her. Friends she once bragged to about her genius plan cut ties. She had lost everything, all because she was greedy enough to try and steal what was never hers. One day, I happened to drive past the house. My house. And who did I see? Lisa, dragging her last suitcase to a rundown rental across town. She glanced up, saw me sitting in my car. I rolled down the window, took a slow, satisfied breath, and said, "Nice place, Lisa. Looks cozy." Then I drove off. Without looking back.